Ladies, gentlemen, and all of you who work for BIP Solutions. It's my pleasure, and in fact an honor, to be invited to give this speech, but I have some trepidation. It's at this stage I always find when you speak in public that one end gets very dry, but the other end goes very moist. So I do apologize to the table in front of me. Some of you have heard me speak before. In fact, I've spoken many times for BIP. It's not that I'm any good, it's just that I'm cheap. But those who have heard me speak, and you've realized I've got a Mancunian drawl, which can be somewhat tedious. The last time I spoke at an event like this, a couple came up to me at the end and they thanked me most profusely. They said it was the first opportunity they'd had to sleep together for 2 years. But my humility or humbleness was rectified a little bit later by Simon, who came up and encouraged me because he said he'd heard somebody say that they thought I was a shining wit. Yeah, So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to say a few words about BIP, and particularly the man we've already heard of, who co-founded the company and has led it ever since. So when I was asked to talk about Mr. Ronald Llewellyn Burges, with one S, it caused me to reminisce not only about the business professional aspects, but some more informal memories that I have of the company and Ron in particular. I'd known him many years in my previous career in procurement in the NHS, and I'd come across him at various events, but he was one of these people that never had a great deal to say for himself, always reluctant to express his views. So when I retired in 2006, I was delighted and in fact honoured to be invited to become a non-exec director. But as always on those occasions, you have to do some due diligence. So one of the things I do if somebody gives me an invitation is to go to the Oxford Dictionary of Proper Names. And I looked at Burges with one S. And it means witty, intelligent, handsome. I then looked at Ron, which means not very. But working with him, I soon realized what kind of man he was, you know, the kind of person that has a smile on his face first thing every morning, so he gets it over with. I remember one of the staff I met on one of my early visits saying that we have a nickname for Ron. It's Pepper. I said, is that because you think he's red hot? They said, no, it's because he gets up your nose. But on one of my first visits up here, and I've been here many times, Ron invited me to go out to his house for a meal. Now, I knew his reputation, shrewd businessman, lived many years in Glasgow, so I went out, had a good meal beforehand. But he'd been very kind. He'd told me which bus I had to catch to get out to Campbell's Lane. And it was quite fortunate because the bus stop to get there was just outside the YMCA hostel that Joanne had put me into. But anyway, eventually I found his little semi-detached house out there. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't have been more wrong. I went into his house, into his dining room, and there's a large dining room table covered in food. I've never seen so much quality food. And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, his prices were extremely reasonable. But I found out as I got to know Ron that he and I had things in common. We both grew up in Manchester, in North Cheshire. Our formative years had been in the 1960s. The 1960s, when to a Manchester lad, safe sex was not telling her your real name. I'm being barracked by Ron's wife, Carolyn. Don't know what she knows about it, but I think safe sex for Ron now is a handrail round the bed. But we both, in our childhood years, back in the 1950s, times were harder than they are now. Not far after the war, and many of us would get our clothes, our school clothes, from the local Army and Navy, the military surplus stores. Ron and Les, his older brother, were the only children at their school that used to go dressed as Japanese generals. But Ron had an additional handicap. They found out early on that he couldn't eat peanuts, and those were the days before we understood allergies and all this stuff about what you could eat or what you couldn't eat. So when he was sent to school, on the front of his blazer, he had a big sign said, "No nuts." But over the years, I've got to know Carolyn, Ron's wife, well. And Carolyn's nickname for Ron is Spider-Man. So I said, "Is that because he's your all-action superhero?" She said, "No, it's because he has difficulty getting out of the bath." I think there's some truth in that. Yeah. Apparently, as they were coming out tonight for this big event, Ron said to Carolyn, "Did you ever, in your wildest dreams, think that I would one day be executive chairman of a major Scottish company with prestigious offices on the banks of the Clyde?" And Carolyn thought for a while, and then she looked Ron in the eye and said, "Ron, let's be clear on one thing. You never, ever appear in my wildest dreams." Carolyn's saying, true, yeah. But I've been able to see Ron in action in the company and see his inspirational staff presentations. And they'd start at the operations board I used to attend, with him giving an outline, as he did tonight, on the state of the company. And I remember one memorable opening statement to one of his speeches when he said, "Last year, we stood on the edge of a precipice. This year, we took a giant leap forward." But I'm pleased that I can announce tonight that Ron, over the last year or so, has been writing a book, a business handbook, about his lessons over the years and how to be an entrepreneur. It's entitled, I've Upped My Income, Up Yours. But ladies and gentlemen, after that lighter browse through one's life, it might just be a little bit serious and just give you my perspectives on BIP Solutions and Ron as I've got to know them. I'm fortunate I can look from several viewpoints, my experience in public sector procurement, the commercial sector which supplies now the public sector, and not least been part of BIP itself, which you'd heard for over 8 years. Obviously, BIP, as we've heard, hit the streets 30 years ago, founded by Ron and Les, his brother. And it's fascinating, we haven't heard the spark that led to its creation. Ron, previously to those 30 years, had a laundrette business, in fact 2 laundrettes, one on Great Western Road in Glasgow, and one in Annisland, I believe. And ever the opportunist, Ron noticed that his machines weren't being used at night, so how could he sweat the asset, as they say? And he happened to notice an advert in the local paper for a contract for the theatre. I think it was the King's Theatre, and they wanted somebody to clean the costumes for their pantomimes. And Ron bid and was successful. In fact, Simon tells me that for many years at Christmas, he'd be seen wearing a hedgehog costume. But whilst in this business, Ron was asked to launder the stage costume for Barry Manilow. That's all right, no. Barry Manilow was appearing at the Apollo Theatre here in Glasgow on the 5th and 6th of September 1983, and he wanted somebody to launder, to dry clean his costume, which Ron did. Unfortunately, it shrank. And Barry Manilow sued Ron for damages. Unsuccessfully, I'm glad to hear. But that probably explains why he's now got a high voice and a pointed face. Barry, that is, not Ron. But it was that experience of almost accidentally spotting an advertisement for public sector business, because the King's Theatre was, and I think still is, indirectly owned by the council, that made him think there must be a way of bringing public sector business as it's advertised to the view of those that might want to bid for that business. And that's how it all started. The core of the business then, and remains the main part of the company now. Originally paper-based, now electronic and online. It was tough in those days. Samantha and Simon, then Ron and Carolyn's children, would spend their school holidays stuffing papers and contract schedules into envelopes. They were paid per 1,000 envelopes. Fortunately, by the time that Ryan, their 3rd child, came along, child slavery had been abolished in Scotland. But I say that's how it all started. And we've heard about the premises from the Porter Cabin in Burnbank through to the terrace house at 15 Woodlands at Charing Cross, to the unique building I found, and this is when I first got to know BIP, the TARDIS-like premises in Shorefield next to the Greyhound track. I never understood when I used to go there how many people could work in one smallish building. And I remember the board meetings in those days, half the agenda was hearing about the problems they'd had with the catering and the toilets. But we now know, and from Ron, how the company has grown and its current premises and the future intent. It's inspiring for me to have reviewed where BIP Solutions has come from and what is achieved. And I had a list of these achievements, but Ron, in his speech, has stolen the next part of my speech. The bastard. So I'm not going to repeat those. But those achievements over 30 years have been considerable. One I would mention is the 2012 Olympic Development Portal and what that did for opening up business to many companies who would not have had that success. I listen to the local news down where I live in the West Midlands, and there's a company down there, an engineering company, that was going to go out of business. It had 10 staff, and it was going to go out of business. The recession had hit. They saw the portal, they bid, and they got the contract to manufacture the Olympic torch. As a result of that, that company didn't go out of business and now employs over 100 staff. And if Compete For hadn't been put onto the market, company, and I'm sure there are many, many examples, that wouldn't have happened. And I just hope that the lesson... And it's good to hear that the lessons from that are being extended. There is a great deal more opportunities for that, and I hope they'll be taken up, particularly by the government down there south of the border, who are a bit slow in these things, unfortunately. But now, if I can turn to the man who co-created BIP, Ron Burges. A man, as you've heard, I've got to know well, a man of vision, ideas, and integrity, with astute business acumen and drive, committed to improving public sector procurement, impatient at the slow uptake sometimes of the ideas, a man dedicated to being part of the Glasgow business community and the wider Scotland business environment, and wanting to contribute to its ongoing improvement. And I use another example. I know that 4 or 5 years ago, Ron could have sold BIP Solutions. He could have sold it for a great deal of money. He didn't. Most of us would have accepted that offer, I can assure you. Ron didn't. And afterwards, Ron explained to me that he could not have lived with himself if he'd sold to the company who wanted to buy it, who undoubtedly would have shut down the operation here in Glasgow and moved it to London, if not overseas. He couldn't live with himself if he saw what he had built up here in Glasgow and is continuing to build up had been destroyed. And that story says it all to me. And it's soon after that Ron took the decision and the risk of moving to the wonderful premises along the river here. And we heard how the staff numbers have grown, and we've heard about the impressive, and this is another thing about Ron, his commitment to charity. So I conclude by summarising in a poem of thank yous to Ron and BI Solutions. Thank you for all the companies who have had business opportunities opened up to them, especially as a consequence ensuring that public money has enhanced the economic well-being of Scotland, to some degree the wider UK, and the local communities inherent up here in Scotland. Thank you for the government and public sector procurement organisations whose staff have individually and collectively benefited from the wide range of BIP training, educational and consultancy activities. Thank you from Glasgow and Scotland for being part of the city's and country's business infrastructure. But finally, and most especially, thank you for all those who have worked for BI Solutions, particularly from those here tonight, for the opportunity to be part of such a successful company. Ron and Carolyn, your family, all of you individually who work for BIP Solutions and BIP Solutions corporately, I wish you a long and increasingly prosperous future. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege on your behalf to invite Ron to accept a gift from us as a token of our appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Burges.
I've just